Thanksgiving night had a quiet magic that Margaret Lewis couldn't quite describe. At 52, she had learned to live with silence after her husband passed away years ago. Her Chicago home was modest but cozy, full of memories, soft lighting, and the lingering smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. Margaret had always been a woman of routine, walking to the lake in the mornings, working as a high school counselor during the day, and filling the evenings with books or letters she never sent. Loneliness had been her companion, steady and predictable. But on this night, something unusual stirred. Her daughter, Emily, 30 years old and full of life, had recently married Daniel Carter, a quiet, kind architect from Boston. Daniel was a man who seemed to understand her daughter in ways Margaret never had, and she had trusted him from the start. He was careful, responsible, gentle, and thoughtful. Margaret liked him, she trusted him, he was safe. And yet, on this Thanksgiving night, Margaret noticed something that made her uneasy. The house was filled with the last echoes of the holiday laughing friends. The clinking of cutlery, the warmth of conversation that slowly dissolved as guests departed. Emily had retreated upstairs, exhausted after hosting her first large holiday dinner. Margaret remained in the kitchen, washing dishes, enjoying the quiet that followed the noise. The water ran over her hands, the plates glinting in the warm light. And she felt the simple satisfaction of care. That's when she sensed someone behind her, Margaret. Daniel's voice was soft, almost hesitant, drawing her attention. She turned and found him standing in the doorway. He wasn't smiling in the usual warm way. He wasn't tired or playful. He looked serious, thoughtful, contemplative. His eyes held an unfamiliar depth. And Margaret felt a flutter she hadn't expected. "I just wanted to thank you," Daniel said quietly, his voice low and sincere, "for everything you do. For Emily, for all of us." Margaret smiled politely. "It's what mothers do," she replied. But he didn't look away. His gaze lingered. It wasn't bold or inappropriate, just intense. It was subtle, yet it stirred something within her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself she was imagining things. Loneliness, grief, and exhaustion could make ordinary gestures seem more meaningful than they were. "You should get some rest. It's been a long day," she said. Breaking the silence, he nodded but lingered near the doorway, almost as if he wanted to say more but couldn't, as he passed her on his way upstairs. His shoulder brushed hers lightly, a touch so brief it could have been accidental, yet Margaret felt it in a way that resonated far longer than it should. It stayed with her as she finished cleaning the kitchen. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the moment, analyzing every gesture, every glance. She told herself repeatedly that nothing had happened, that she was overthinking. Loneliness could do strange things to the heart. Still, a quiet awareness had shifted. Something subtle had changed in her life, and it was impossible to ignore in the following weeks. Margaret began noticing more of these moments. At Sunday dinners, Daniel's eyes sometimes lingered a little too long across the table. When Emily stepped out of the room, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. They spoke about books, music, memories of their youth, fears and hopes that had never been shared before. Laughter became more private, intimate, in a way that was unspoken. Margaret tried to distance herself, keeping busy with friends and errands, avoiding prolonged conversations. She told herself firmly that Daniel was her daughter's husband, that any feelings stirred by his presence were wrong, but feelings rarely obey reason. One evening in early December, Emily had to work late at the hospital. Daniel stopped by Margaret's house to return some borrowed holiday decorations. Snow covered the sidewalks, soft and thick, the kind that muffled the city and made the world feel smaller, quieter. "You can come in for a minute, Margaret," said, stepping aside. He hesitated, brushing snow from his coat before entering. Inside, the house was warm and quiet, lit by the soft glow of lamps in the fireplace. Margaret offered tea, which he accepted. They sat across from each other in the living room. At first, the conversation was casual Emily's schedule, work stories, the cold weather. But slowly, the topics shifted toward personal matters, toward feelings they rarely shared. "I sometimes feel invisible," Daniel said quietly, staring into his cup. "Like no one really sees me." Margaret nodded, understanding more than she wanted to admit. She had lived with similar feelings after her husband died, being strong, holding everything together, hiding her loneliness so that Emily could thrive without worry. "We all feel that way sometimes," she said softly. He looked at her then in a way that made her catch her breath. Not with desire, not with longing for anything inappropriate, but with recognition, understanding, a shared awareness of what it meant to feel unseen. Margaret's heart stirred in a way she had not expected. She imagined for just a fleeting second what it might be like to be noticed, to be seen, to feel alive again. But she did not act on it. She stood. "You should head home before the roads get worse," she said, trying to sound calm. Though her heart raced, Daniel hesitated, his eyes holding a quiet question that he didn't ask aloud. He left, walking into the snowy evening. Margaret closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. She knew a line had been crossed, not physically, but emotionally. A spark had ignited that could not be ignored. Over the next weeks, Margaret tried to maintain distance. She visited friends, occupied her evenings, and kept conversations brief. Daniel focused on Emily, being the caring, loving husband he had always been. Yet every glance, every smile, every moment shared in the same room reminded her of that spark. It was subtle, restrained, but persistent. At Christmas dinner, their hands brushed briefly while reaching for the same serving spoon. They both pulled away immediately, embarrassed, aware of what the touch had stirred. Emily noticed nothing, happily chatting about holiday plans and future projects. Margaret smiled, but her chest felt heavy with guilt and confusion. Each day, Margaret reminded herself of the reality. Daniel was her daughter's husband. Any lingering feeling had to be contained, acknowledged only as a fleeting human reaction, not acted upon. Yet she could not deny this small thrill of being seen, of being understood, of feeling alive after years of quiet endurance. Then, one afternoon, when Margaret was walking along the lake under a gray winter sky, she realized the truth. She had been waiting for something, perhaps a message, perhaps a sign, perhaps a fleeting moment of connection, but it was better that it never came. That restraint, that decision to keep loyalty above longing, would define her character and preserve her daughter's happiness. Margaret returned home, feeling a mix of relief and longing. She understood that emotional awareness could be powerful, even dangerous, if not carefully managed. That Thanksgiving night, that simple glance, that fleeting touch, they were all reminders of how fragile life could feel when emotions intersected in unexpected ways. From that point on, Margaret became more careful. She still cared for Daniel, still noticed his presence, but she kept conversations neutral, interactions polite, and boundaries firm. The emotional tension never disappeared entirely, rarely does, but she had taken control, acknowledging her feelings without allowing them to override reason or responsibility. By the time winter deepened and snow blanketed the city, Margaret had accepted that her heart could feel things she could not act upon. Emotional connection and human understanding were powerful, but some desires had to be restrained. She understood the stakes: Emily's happiness, her family's trust, and her own integrity. Part 1 closed on that quiet acknowledgement. Margaret, alone in her home, felt both the pull of her own heart and the weight of responsibility. She realized that the moments between people, glances, conversations, shared silence, could shape futures, teach lessons, and awaken feelings that were long dormant. But restraint, loyalty, and self-awareness were what allowed love in its truest sense to endure. And Margaret knew deep down that the next winter night, when circumstances might force them together again, she would have to be even stronger. She would have to face the same emotional tension with clarity, choosing loyalty and integrity over temptation. That understanding left her awake into the night, staring at the quiet streets outside, snow falling softly, knowing that the rest of the story where desire met choice was yet to be written. Winter had settled over Chicago, cold and sharp, the kind of cold that made streets quiet and the world feel small. Margaret Lewis had spent weeks trying to put distance between herself and Daniel Carter, her daughter's husband, who had inadvertently stirred feelings she knew she could not act on. She filled her days with volunteering, book clubs, and counseling work at the high school, keeping her evenings deliberately busy. She reminded herself constantly that her loyalty was to her daughter, Emily, and that any emotional pull toward Daniel had to remain restrained, observed, but never indulged. Daniel, meanwhile, had thrown himself fully into his marriage. He was attentive, patient, and present. He planned small surprises for Emily, cooked dinner when she worked late, and began suggesting thoughtful ways for them to spend time together. Outwardly, his marriage looked steady and strong. Yet beneath the surface, both he and Margaret knew that tension lingered quiet, restrained, but undeniably present. One February evening, a heavy snowstorm struck the city without warning. Roads iced over, public transport stopped. And Emily called her mother from the hospital, where she had been stranded after a sudden shift extension. "Mom," she said over the phone, her voice calm but tinged with fatigue, "I might be stuck here tonight. Daniel is on his way to check on you in case the storm worsens." Margaret's stomach tightened. She appreciated the care, but the thought of being alone with Daniel, even in the most innocent circumstances, made her heart beat faster than usual. "I'll be fine," she replied quickly. "Don't worry about me." An hour later, a knock came at her door. Daniel stood there, snow clinging to his coat, the wind pushing in behind him as she opened the door. "Emily asked me to check on you," he said softly. "With the storm coming, I wanted to make sure you were okay." Margaret stepped aside, silently gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. She placed candles on the dining table, their soft glow casting gentle shadows on the walls. The storm outside made the world feel paused, and inside the two of them sat quietly, each aware of the subtle tension lingering between them. "This can't keep happening," Margaret said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was low but firm. "These feelings, this tension, it isn't healthy for anyone." Daniel nodded, meeting her eyes. "I know," he said softly. "I've tried to ignore it, but it's been hard. Not because I want to do anything wrong, but because I feel things I wasn't expecting." Margaret took a deep breath, her chest tight. She had felt the same thing. The emotional pull, the connection, the subtle awareness of being seen after years of quiet loneliness. But she also loved her daughter. That love made her strong, reminding her that some feelings had to be recognized, but never acted upon. They spoke then carefully, each word measured, each glance acknowledged but restrained. Daniel admitted he often felt invisible, tired of always being the strong one for Emily. Margaret spoke of her own losses, her years of hiding grief so that Emily could thrive without worry. In the flickering candlelight, they shared understanding, warmth, and vulnerability. But neither crossed the line into anything romantic or inappropriate. For a fleeting moment, they stood close. Not close enough to act on anything, but close enough that the air between them was charged with what might have been. Margaret's heart fluttered as she felt the warmth and awareness of being noticed, of being understood. It had been a long time since she felt this alive. Yet the very awareness made her realize how dangerous such moments could be. "This ends tonight," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel's eyes softened, no longer filled with longing but with respect. Right? He said. I will not let this jeopardize Emily's trust. The storm raged on outside, but inside, clarity had settled. They spent the rest of the evening speaking carefully, choosing safe topics books, news, mundane things that grounded them in reality. By morning, when the storm finally subsided, dangerous emotional tension had been acknowledged, contained, and set aside. Both had recognized the pull, but both had chosen integrity and loyalty over desire. In the following weeks, behavior shifted naturally. Daniel became more attentive to Emily, surprising her with thoughtful gestures, engaging in conversations they had avoided, and suggesting counseling sessions to strengthen their communication. Emily, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents between her mother and husband, responded with gratitude and joy, noticing only the renewed effort and care in her marriage. Margaret returned to her routines, volunteering, walking by the lake, and spending time with friends. She still noticed Daniel's presence during family gatherings. But the awareness was different now, respectful and distanced. The tension had faded, leaving only gratitude and understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that emotions are complicated, but can be managed with wisdom and integrity. Over time, Margaret observed the subtle changes in Emily and Daniel. Their conversations were deeper, their patience with each other stronger. The counseling sessions helped them communicate in ways they hadn't before. The emotional connection between them grew, and Margaret, from her place of careful distance, felt a sense of relief and contentment. She had protected her daughter's happiness and preserved the integrity of her own heart. One spring afternoon, Emily hugged Margaret tightly. "You've always shown me what strength looks like," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Ah, great," smiled, feeling tears rise. Strength was not about giving in to fleeting emotions. It was about making the right choice, even when desire and curiosity stirred within. Months later, Emily and Daniel welcomed their first child. Margaret held her grandson in her arms, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Tiny fingers wrapped around hers, soft warmth against her skin, and in that moment, she realized that the emotional storm of the previous winter had passed. She had faced desire, temptation, and emotional connection, and she had chosen wisely. Daniel caught her eye for a brief moment, nodding in silent acknowledgement. There was no longing in that glance, no unspoken invitation, only respect. Respect for her integrity, her restraint, and the way she had handled the emotional complexities between them. Margaret returned the nod, a quiet smile touching her lips, as the baby slept in Margaret's arms. She reflected on that snowy winter night. The night where awareness and attraction had threatened to upset the delicate balance of her family. It had been dangerous, emotional, and confusing, but it had not led to harm. They had all emerged intact, strengthened by the choices made, guided by love, loyalty, and integrity. Outside the hospital window, a gentle snow fell, soft and calm. The storm was gone, and with it, the emotional tension that had once loomed. So large. Margaret understood that life was full of such moments that test boundaries, emotions, and self-control. What defined a person was not the feelings themselves, but the choices made in response to them. She thought of Daniel and Emily, sitting together in the hospital room, hands intertwined, talking softly, sharing small smiles. She felt gratitude for Daniel's presence in her daughter's life and for his choice to honor loyalty above fleeting emotion. She felt pride in herself for having recognized the pull of desire, but also for having resisted it, choosing integrity over indulgence. Margaret knew that this experience had changed her too. She felt more alive, more aware of her own capacity for emotion, more capable of empathy and understanding. But she also felt secure in her boundaries, knowing that restraint could coexist with awareness. The emotional spark that had once startled her was no longer threatening. It had been acknowledged, contained, and transformed into wisdom. Weeks passed, and life returned to routine. Emily and Daniel flourished as a couple, growing stronger, more understanding, and deeply in love. Margaret continued her quiet routines, volunteering, walking, reading, and enjoying the subtle pleasures of everyday life. Her relationship with Daniel remained respectful, cordial, and safe, grounded in mutual acknowledgement but without any crossing of boundaries. As spring turned to summer, Margaret found herself reflecting often on the lessons of that winter night. Emotional awareness and temptation were powerful, but choice was stronger. Love was not only about feeling, it was about action and responsibility. By choosing loyalty over desire, Margaret had preserved her daughter's happiness, her family's trust, and her own self-respect. One bright afternoon, Margaret stood by the window, looking out at the city bathed in sunlight. She felt a quiet joy, a peaceful contentment. The tension, the longing, and the uncertainty of the winter had transformed into clarity and emotional strength. She understood that life often presents tests of character, and it is the choices made in those moments that define the heart. Holding her grandson close, Margaret whispered softly, "Everything is exactly as it should be." She felt warmth, not just from the baby in her arms, but from the knowledge that she had acted rightly, with love, integrity, and courage. The story of that winter night would remain with her, a reminder of the delicate balance between emotion and responsibility, between desire and loyalty. And as the snow melted outside and spring fully blossomed, Margaret knew that they had all come through the storm intact and stronger. The love in her family had survived not because the emotions were absent, but because they had been.